What happens when an undercover boss walks into his own restaurant and is shocked by his staff's treatment of a homeless man? The city streets bustled with life, yet nestled in the heart of downtown stood Grill Haven, one of the busiest restaurants in the chain owned by Harold Whitman. As CEO of the rapidly expanding fast casual franchise, Harold had built his empire on a promise of quality food and customer-first service. But lately, rumors of mistreatment and poor leadership in some locations had reached his ears. Determined to uncover the truth, Harold devised a plan. He would go undercover and experience his own company as an ordinary customer. Disguised in faded jeans, a weathered baseball cap, and a plain grey t-shirt, Harold stepped through the doors of Grill Haven. The aroma of sizzling burgers and crisp fries greeted him, a familiar scent that once symbolized his dream. He scanned the room, noticing the chatter of families, students, and office workers enjoying their meals. Yet something felt off. Harold walked toward the counter, observing the staff. The team appeared stressed. A young cashier named Tanya frantically worked the register, her movements sharp and frustrated. Behind her, a shift manager barked orders, his voice sharp and impatient. Employees exchanged weary glances as they rushed to keep up with orders. "Next," Tanya called out, her voice strained. Harold stepped forward, ordering a simple cheeseburger and fries. Tanya barely made eye contact as she punched in his order. When Harold handed over a $20 bill, Tanya sighed heavily, as if inconvenienced. Without a word, she returned his change, then called for the next customer before Harold could even step aside. As Harold waited for his food, he observed the team's dynamic. The kitchen staff moved in chaotic bursts, and the manager, identified by his name tag reading Bryce, seemed more focused on intimidating his staff than encouraging them. Moments later, a disheveled man wearing a faded hoodie and torn shoes entered. His eyes darted nervously as he approached the counter. "Excuse me," the man said softly, his voice barely audible. I don't have enough money, but could I maybe get something small? Anything left over?" Before Tanya could answer, Bryce stormed to the front. "No handouts," Bryce snapped coldly. "We're not a charity." "Please," the man stammered. I haven't eaten all day. Just some fries or anything you—" I said no, but Bryce barked, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Get out before I call security." The room fell silent. Customers paused mid-bite, some whispering among themselves. The man's face fell. With trembling hands, he turned and slowly shuffled toward the door. Harold felt his chest tighten. The man's sunken eyes told a story of hardship, and Bryce's hostility only deepened the cruelty. "Hey!" Harold called out impulsively. The homeless man turned, unsure if Harold's voice was one of anger or kindness. Harold stepped forward. "You can have my meal," he said softly, holding out the tray that had just been delivered. The man's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you sure?" "Yeah," Harold nodded. "It's yours." The man whispered a quiet thank you before carrying the tray to a corner booth, quietly savoring every bite. Harold's gaze shifted back to Bryce, who stood scowling, clearly displeased by Harold's interference. "You got a problem," Bryce snapped, approaching Harold. "Just seemed like the right thing to do," Harold replied calmly. "Yeah? Well, it's not your place," Bryce sneered. "That guy's always hanging around. Feeding him just makes him come back." Harold clenched his fists, swallowing his frustration. Maybe he wouldn't have to come back if someone just showed him a little kindness. "You don't run this place," Bryce scoffed. "Now get out of here." Harold nodded slowly and stepped away, but he wasn't leaving. Not yet. He found a booth near the back, pulled out a notepad from his bag, and began observing the staff more closely. Over the next hour, Harold witnessed several troubling patterns. Bryce frequently berated his employees, calling them slow and useless. I say, staff members avoided interacting with customers whenever possible, rushing orders with minimal effort. One employee, a young woman named Elena, appeared particularly stressed, running orders, handling customer complaints, and repeatedly picking up slack for her overwhelmed co-workers. Tanya, the cashier from earlier, seemed miserable. Her tired eyes hinted at burnout, and she barely smiled at customers. Meanwhile, Bryce spent more time scrolling on his phone than assisting his team. Just before closing, Harold noticed Elena step outside. Curious, he followed quietly, watching her slip a paper bag, marked with Grillhaven's logo, into the homeless man's hands. The man's face lit up, gratitude washing over him. "You didn't have to do that," Harold said softly, stepping closer. Elena turned, startled. I just couldn't let him go hungry," she murmured. "But please, don't tell Bryce. He'd fire me." Harold gave her a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing." As Harold left Grillhaven that night, his mind raced. Bryce's toxic leadership was poisoning the team, and only one person, Elena, seemed to carry the heart and kindness that Harold had envisioned for his company. But kindness alone wouldn't fix this. Harold knew he couldn't just watch from the sidelines anymore. It was time to step in, and this time, as CEO, he wouldn't hold back. The morning after Harold witnessed Bryce's cruel behavior, he returned to Grillhaven with a plan. Dressed in his regular clothes, sharp blazer, pressed slacks, and no disguise, Harold walked through the front doors. Employees glanced at him, some recognizing him, others unsure. Tanya's eyes widened in surprise. Elena froze near the drink station, her eyes nervously darting to Bryce's office door. Harold made his way to the counter. "Morning," he greeted Tanya. "Is Bryce in?" Yeah," Tanya stammered. "But he's busy." "I'll wait," Harold said firmly, heading to a table by the window. From his seat, he observed the staff. The same chaotic routine as yesterday. Tanya looked drained. Jose limped through his shift without complaint, and Eleanor handled far more than her fair share of duties. Moments later, Bryce stomped out of his office, still holding his phone in one hand. "What do you need?" he grunted. As he approached Harold's table, Harold stood. "We need to talk." "Yeah? About what?" "About you," Harold said sharply. "And what I saw yesterday." Bryce sneered. "You mean that homeless guy? You think feeding him's going to fix his life? People like him don't change." "And what about your employees?" Harold pressed. "Why are they terrified of you? Why is Elena practically running this place alone while you sit in your office?" Bryce crossed his arms. "You think you know how to run this place better?" "I do," Harold said coldly. "Because I own this company." He pulled out his wallet, flashing his CEO identification. "And after what I've seen, you're done here. You're fired. Effective immediately." Bryce's face turned bright red. "You can't—" "I just did," Harold interrupted. "Collect your things and leave. Now." For a moment, Bryce stood frozen. Then, without another word, he stormed back to his office. Harold turned to the stunned employees gathered nearby. "Let's talk," Harold said. In the break room, Harold faced the staff. Their expressions ranged from relief to suspicion. "I know you're tired," Harold began. "And I know Bryce made this a tough place to work. But starting today, things are changing." He paused, scanning their faces. "If Bryce forced you to clock out early and keep working, you're getting paid for those hours. If your schedule was unfairly cut, I'll fix it. And if you've been mistreated by anyone, you'll have a direct line to me." "Yeah? And what happens when you're gone?" Jose asked bitterly. "Bryce wasn't the first bad manager we've had." "I get it," Harold said. "That's why I'm making this permanent, starting with new leadership." He turned to Eleanor. "I watched you yesterday. You handled this store better than anyone I've seen. You supported your team. You cared about the customers. And you refused to turn your back on someone who needed help." He smiled. "That's what a real leader does. If you're willing, I want you to step up as the new shift manager." Elena's eyes widened. "Me? I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe you could do it," Harold said. For a moment, Eleanor hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll do my best. I know you will, Harold said warmly. The next few days were challenging. Without Bryce, the team scrambled to keep pace. Tanya, still shaken from months under Bryce's reign, struggled to keep up with orders. Jose limped through his shifts, insisting he could handle it, and Eleanor faced constant pressure as she learned her new role. On his third day working alongside the staff, Harold found Tanya sitting alone in the break room, her head resting on her folded arms. "Rough day?" Harold asked, pulling up a chair. Tanya sighed. I can't keep up. Bryce always told me I was too slow. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." "That's not true," Harold said firmly. "Bryce made you believe that. But you're better than you think. I've watched you. You care about the customers. You double-check orders. That's not being slow. That's being careful. And careful is exactly what this place needs." "I just don't know if I can bounce back from all this," Tanya murmured. "You can," Harold assured her, "and you won't be alone. Elena's stepping up, and I'll make sure she has the support she needs. You're part of that." Tanya gave a small smile. "Thanks." By the end of the week, Elena's confidence had begun to grow. She organized the crew, reworked the schedule to make things fairer, and encouraged her co-workers. Marcus, who had once been quiet and distant, now regularly stepped in to help. Overwhelmed teammates, Jose finally agreed to take time off after Harold insisted his job would be safe while he recovered. "We've got this," Elena assured him. "Take the time you need." The biggest shift, however, came when Elena made a surprising decision. On Friday evening, as Harold watched from the dining area, the same homeless man from before returned, hovering near the window. Employees noticed him, whispering nervously, unsure if they should intervene. But this time, Eleanor didn't hesitate. She grabbed a meal from the kitchen and walked outside. "Here," she said, handing the man the bag. "No charge. Just take care of yourself, okay?" The man stared at the bag, stunned. Thank you," he whispered. When Eleanor returned inside, Harold approached her. "That was brave," he said quietly. "It just felt right," Eleanor replied. "It was right," Harold agreed. "And that's why I know you're going to make this place better than ever." For the first time in weeks, Harold felt proud, not just of his company, but of the people who worked hard every day to make it better. But most of all, he knew one thing for certain. This restaurant was finally in good hands. The morning after, Elena's quiet yet powerful act of kindness, Harold returned to Grill Haven, this time with a different goal in mind. Bryce's toxic influence was gone, but that alone wouldn't erase the damage he'd caused. Harold knew that rebuilding trust and strengthening the team would take more than just new policies. It required real change, starting from the ground up. Harold started by walking through the kitchen. The place was functional, but barely. Equipment was outdated, the fryers sputtered inconsistently, and the freezer door hung loosely from its hinges. Bryce's obsession with cutting costs had turned the back of the house into a chaotic mess. "No wonder everyone's been struggling," Harold muttered under his breath. Later that day, Harold stood before the employees, clipboard in hand. "I know you've all been doing your best," he began. "But the truth is, this place hasn't given you the support you need." He paused, letting his eyes meet theirs. "Starting today, we're making some changes." He listed the repairs and upgrades. Coming that week, new fryers, a better freezer door, and fresh kitchen equipment that would make their jobs easier. "No more broken gear," Harold added. "No more struggling because someone before you decided cutting costs mattered more than your sanity." The room erupted with quiet applause. Even the most skeptical employees seemed to breathe easier. Next, Harold shifted his focus to leadership. While Eleanor had stepped up brilliantly, Harold knew she couldn't shoulder everything alone. "I need a leadership team," Harold announced. "People who know the challenges this store faces and can help make sure problems don't build up again." Employees murmured, exchanging uncertain glances. "I want 2 team leads," Harold continued. People who've proven they can handle pressure, support their co-workers and set an example. Elena shifted uneasily in her seat, but Harold turned to her first. I'd like you to help me pick those people. Me? Elena asked, her eyes wide. You've been working closely with this team, Harold said. You know who steps up when things get hard. I trust you. Elena swallowed hard. But after a pause, she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. I can do that. Over the next few days, Elena quietly observed her co-workers. She watched as Marcus stayed late to help Tanya clean the lobby, offering encouraging words when she doubted herself. She noticed Jose, despite still limping slightly, patiently teaching new employees how to manage the fryer station. Both had risen above Bryce's toxic influence, not because they wanted power, but because they genuinely cared. By week's end, Elena approached Harold. I think Marcus and Jose are the right picks, she said. Good choice, Harold agreed. I'll talk to them. When Harold offered them the leadership roles, both were shocked and hesitant. I'm not really manager material, Marcus muttered. You already are, Harold said. You just didn't have the chance to prove it until now. Jose grinned. If you really think I can help, I'm in. I know you can, Harold said with certainty. With his leadership team in place, Harold began focusing on the deeper issue, trust. Employees like Tanya still flinched whenever someone raised their voice. Conversations would drop to whispers anytime Harold walked by. Fear lingered. The scars from Bryce's reign hadn't fully faded. One afternoon, Harold called a team meeting. Employees gathered nervously in the dining area, unsure what to expect. I know some of you are still uneasy, Harold began. And I don't blame you. Bryce made you feel disposable, like speaking up could cost you your job. But that ends now. He stepped forward. From now on, this store is built on respect. If you feel unheard, you can come directly to me, or to Elena, Marcus, or Jose. We're here to listen. No more retaliation. No more intimidation. Yeah, Tanya spoke up. And what if this is just temporary? What happens when you leave? Harold smiled gently. I'm not going anywhere. Not until I know this place is exactly what it should be. And when I do leave, Eleanor's here to lead, and Marcus and Jose are here to back her up. A murmur of relief rippled through the room. The following Friday, Grill Haven was slammed with its biggest dinner rush in weeks. Customers poured in non-stop. Online orders buzzed in rapid succession, and the drive-through line stretched out the parking lot. The staff scrambled to keep up. Tanya juggled customers at the front. Elena barked orders to the kitchen, and Marcus rushed between stations filling, in gaps wherever needed. Despite the chaos, no one panicked. I need extra fries on the double, Elena called. Already on it, Jose shouted back. We're short on cups, Tanya cried from the front. I'll grab more, Marcus answered. Orders kept flowing, but the team worked together, calm, efficient, and focused. By the end of the night, Grill Haven had cleared the rush without a single major mistake. Nice work, everyone, Harold said proudly. You handled that like pros. We had help, Elena said, smiling. You believed in us. No, Harold corrected. You believed in yourselves. Days later, Harold returned for one final visit. This time, he wasn't there to lead. He was there to observe. Through the window, he watched Marcus joke with Jose as they prepped orders. Tanya greeted customers with genuine warmth. Elena moved confidently between stations, checking on her team. They didn't just look like employees anymore, they looked like a family. Suddenly, Harold noticed a familiar face. The homeless man from before lingered by the window, hesitant to come inside. Harold started to get up, but before he could move, Eleanor spotted the man and walked out to greet him. Hey, she said with a smile. Wait right here. Moments later, Elena returned with a small paper bag, another warm meal. No charge, she said. Just take care of yourself, okay? The man's eyes welled up. "Thank you," he whispered. From his seat, Harold smiled. The culture he'd always envisioned for his company, one built on kindness, respect, and care, was finally alive in this store. Not because of him, but because of the people who had stepped up when it mattered most. "They've got this," Harold whispered to himself. "I know they do." With a satisfied smile, Harold walked out the door, confident that Grill Haven's best days were yet to come. The sun had barely risen when Harold arrived at Grill Haven, determined to leave behind lasting changes. The restaurant was operating, better than ever, but Harold knew that fixing broken equipment and replacing toxic leadership wasn't enough. The employees needed to believe this new chapter would last. Harold started by gathering Elena, Marcus, and Jose in the break room before the morning rush. "I'm heading back to corporate soon," Harold began. "But before I go, we need to make sure everything we've built here doesn't fall apart." He turned to Elena. "You've done an incredible job leading the team, but you can't run this place alone." Elena smiled faintly. "I've got Marcus and Jose. They've been amazing." "I know," Harold said, "but I want to give you something more. The authority to make real decisions." He placed a small stack of papers on the table. "This is your promotion package. You're no longer just a shift manager. You're being promoted to general manager, full control of staffing, schedules, and store decisions." "Wait." Elena's eyes widened. "I'm in charge?" "Completely," Harold said. "You've earned it." Elena covered her mouth, tears threatening to spill. I don't know what to say." "Just keep doing what you've been doing," Harold replied warmly. He turned to Marcus and Jose. "I want you, both as team leads. You'll help Elena manage the floor, train new employees, and ensure everything runs smoothly." Marcus grinned. "You really think we can handle all that?" "I know you can," Harold said, "because you've already been doing it." With their new roles in place, Harold spent the next few days training Elena, Marcus, and Jose. They worked together to revise schedules, ensuring employees with families received balanced shifts. Employees like Tanya, who once felt forgotten, were given steady hours and a clear path to advancement. When Jose suggested bringing in an extra part-time employee to help during the chaotic weekend rush, Harold didn't hesitate. "If it makes your job easier," Harold said, "then do it." Soon, the store ran smoother than it ever had before. Customers noticed the change too. Smiles replaced tired stares at the counter, orders arrived faster, and employees seemed happier. But Harold knew there was still one more thing to address. The homeless man Bryce had cruelly rejected. Later, that week, Harold waited near the front window during the evening rush, hoping to spot the man again. Just before sunset, the familiar figure appeared. The same tired eyes, the same worn-out clothes. He stood just outside, clearly too nervous to come inside. Harold grabbed a bag of fresh food from the counter and stepped outside. "Hey!" he called gently. The man flinched and turned as if expecting to be scolded. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," Harold said, "for how you were treated here before. That's not who we are." The man stared in disbelief as Harold handed him the bag. "No charge," Harold added. "I just want you to know you're welcome here. Always." The man's lips quivered. No one's ever said that to me before," he whispered. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Harold said. "And if you ever need a meal, just ask." The next morning, Harold stood near the back of the store, quietly watching his team in action. Elena moved confidently across the floor, checking in with employees and guiding them through busy periods. Marcus and Jose kept the kitchen moving, ensuring food went out fresh and fast. Tanya, once overwhelmed and anxious, smiled warmly at each customer she greeted. Then Harold noticed something that made him smile most of all. At the counter, Eleanor quietly handed a paper bag to a man in worn-out clothes, another struggling individual seeking help. The man offered a quiet "Thank you," and Elena responded with a warm smile. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" she said. Harold knew then that his mission was complete. The toxic culture Bryce had created was gone, replaced by something far stronger. A team built on respect, compassion, and genuine care for one another. As Harold walked out the door for the last time, Eleanor's voice echoed behind him. "Welcome to Grill Haven. What can I get started for you today?" Harold smiled proudly. They didn't just rebuild the store, they built something better.